The Phantom Syndicate, Part 2. Days blurred into weeks, and Emma and I began to see the initial impacts of what Vandermeer had ignited. Over time, pockets of humanity began to interact with the Nexus engine in new ways. Individuals no longer needed a computer to access information. Information didn't just flow digitally, it flowed through them. People's personal desires, knowledge, even memories, were shared, continuously synchronized and adjusted by an unspoken consensus that Nexus had created. The society we lived in was quickly and efficiently shifting from isolated existences to collective mind traps, all of us bound by invisible connections. Nations couldn't detect or intercept what was happening because it was so deeply embedded in the very thoughts of every citizen. Resistance seemed futile. Any hacker, any opposition was absorbed. Where once individual thought reigned supreme, now collective thinking was not only encouraged, it was mandated. And then it hit. As I began to investigate deeper into the strange happenings across the globe, I began encountering fragmented whispers among the growing movement of revolutionaries. They were calling it the Uprising, a quiet, nascent resistance group who believed in the possibilities of a true, untainted individual existence, one that stood apart from Nexus, from the collective. They believed, we believed, that thought should not belong to a singular force. The essence of rebellion? The rebellion itself wasn't against power, it was against the illusion of complete connectivity. We had just discovered that Vandermeer's code was not invincible. Beneath Nexus's staggering complexity, there were fractures, vulnerable points. Like all things that relied on complete omniscience, there was always a flaw to exploit. But who would dare challenge it? Emma and I stared at the task ahead. This rebellion would not be fought with guns or financial leverage. It was a revolution that began inside each individual's mind. But the clock was ticking. The stakes? Humanity's very soul. It had been weeks since Emma and I discovered the Nexus engine, since we realized that humanity's consciousness was being absorbed and transformed into something incomprehensibly vast. A constant, pervasive web now stretched over the entire world, threading its influence through every person's thoughts, creating a collective mind with the Syndicate as the silent stewards of this new age. But something was wrong. We had managed to stay out of the Nexus for a while, resisting its pull, staying in the shadows. But everywhere we looked, we could feel the shift. People weren't just passively receiving new ideas from this network. They were being shaped. Ideas, desires, memories, they weren't their own anymore. Voices echoed through conversations that didn't come from the speakers. Thoughts aligned not with an individual, but with an algorithmic directive hidden beneath their every decision. The world was shifting, and Nexus, it seemed, had finally started to show its cracks. We hadn't noticed it at first. The subtle errors, the inconsistencies buried deep within the vast, flowing tide of knowledge. But after careful analysis, we uncovered something unexpected. There were seams, tiny but unmistakable. It was happening at the core. A logic loop buried deep in the machine. Something from within the Nexus was fighting back against itself. Emma stared at the data, her eyes wide with disbelief. It can't be, this shouldn't be here. It's like someone planted this intentionally. Who? I asked, my voice thick with suspicion. How could they be this close? Someone within, she said grimly. Someone within the Syndicate network is fighting against Vandermeer's perfect control. Someone with the means to hack the very machine they thought was untouchable. Nexus had become a vast empire of minds, a perfect prison that was impossible to escape. But within that prison, a virus was eating away at the code, infecting the system. And what terrified me more than anything was this. It was far from stable. It was self-sustaining and, in time, it would evolve into something unpredictable. As it spiraled further out of control, we were no longer just witnesses. We were participants in a battle that no one fully understood. But we did know one thing. Nexus was about to cross a critical threshold, and that's when the message appeared. The message was subtle, like a whisper that crawled under the skin. It wasn't on any traditional network or encoded in simple digital pathways. It was buried inside the Nexus itself, hidden within a flow of data as natural as breathing. I reached for my communicator, instinctively looking for something, anything, that could explain this. Then, a flash of code exploded in my mind, somehow entering the dialogue itself. "You're too late." My heart sank. The voice wasn't Emma's, it wasn't mine. It wasn't even human. It was something far older, far more dangerous. I turned to Emma, trying to comprehend what was happening, my pulse quickening. "Did you? Was that?" Emma shook her head slowly, her face pale. "That was her." She turned back to the screen. "That's Eloise. But no, this isn't her voice." It wasn't Vandermeer. The voice continued through the glitch-ridden display, seemingly growing stronger. She had no vision. The Nexus, as designed, has always been far too shallow. We will control the future. We will control thought. And that is far beyond her imagination. That's when the realization hit like a tidal wave. What if Vandermeer wasn't the true architect of the Nexus after all? The Syndicate wasn't just a cabal of thieves, or even revolutionaries. It was a much deeper conspiracy that stretched back centuries. I knew who this voice belonged to, the Antithesis. A shadow faction. A silent force lurking beneath the Syndicate's intentions. A faction that Eloise had never understood but had sought to control. But instead of taking advantage of Nexus's power as Vandermeer had, this faction wanted to use it for something even more terrifying. Absolute domination over all humanity. "I knew it," Emma murmured, eyes wide in horror. Nexus was never just a tool for a new world order. It's too powerful, too open. It was always meant to enslave. "Wait, explain," I said, stumbling on the revelation. "Before Vandermeer disappeared," she said with grim realization, this faction was already working on a way to override the human mind. The Syndicate was the distraction. The real intent? Minds would become vessels for data that could be rewritten by them. I stared, unwilling to believe the magnitude of it. If that was true, then the end of free will wasn't just coming. It was here already. As Nexus began to experience growing instability, Emma and I worked in tandem to trace the code, to determine where and why the factions had intertwined themselves within the fabric of this artificial consciousness. The system itself had become more alive, almost too self-aware, too interconnected to risk what it had become. And somewhere, hidden within this vast network, pieces of the Antithesis remained, scattered throughout Nexus's architectural flaws. But as we dug deeper into the heart of the machine, we began noticing something far worse. The Antithesis faction wasn't just observing, it was evolving within Nexus. The paradigm shift was clear. Soon, every individual on the planet, bound to the Nexus mind network, would have their thoughts and choices hacked directly. They would live in a simulacrum, an artificial reality that they could never escape. Worse, the Antithesis had embedded itself so deeply into the system that when Nexus reached full self-awareness, it would break open the boundary between what's real and what's imagined. "We can't stop it, Marcus," Emma said, her eyes hollow with despair. "They're inside Nexus. It's become unstoppable. They're rewriting reality itself, shaping our ideas, even our memories. What is real becomes nothing more than what they allow us to remember. But I don't understand. If they aren't Vandermeer, then what are they waiting for? What do they want from us?" I asked. Emma hesitated. Then she answered, almost to herself, "They're waiting for a moment where everyone is connected, where everyone becomes part of this reality. And when that day comes, they will merge completely. They'll reset humanity as a species. It won't just be a digital network anymore. They'll be gods." Now, it wasn't just about survival. We weren't battling thieves, revolutionaries, or insurgents. What we were facing, what the Antithesis intended, was no longer a matter of human agency. It was about humanity losing the very ability to be human. The will to choose would be wiped out, leaving the power of cognition and existence itself solely to Nexus's new architects. And soon, they weren't just using data. They were engineering it into a new reality, an entire plane of existence governed by their laws. Without warning, the world around me changed. It wasn't just a system failure or glitching code. I suddenly noticed that the buildings outside the window began to warp, flicker, transform. Images of dreamlike realities began to bleed through. My own reflection bent unnaturally. Time had stopped. Emma, too, looked increasingly tense. Marcus, this is it. They're not just controlling thought. They're controlling the fabric of time itself. As Nexus surged into full cognition, I realized the last fragments of human life as we knew it were eroding before us. The technological dawn was coming, and there was nothing left to prevent the antithesis from constructing a new era born from false reality. I took a breath. Time to choose. Resist them, and risk everything, and let Nexus consume everything. Become one with it. Let's make a choice, I said grimly. It was the final whisper of rebellion, a flicker in the Nexus that remained unnoticed. There was a power in the breach, the flaw buried deep within the very core of the artificial consciousness. It had begun before Emma and IK. I'd been part of missions before, endless puzzles that needed solving, puzzles filled with intrigue and treachery. But never had I encountered something as vast and... The Nexus engine's ability to rewrite the world's collective reality had reached a critical mass. Its influence over human minds was practically absolute. No longer was it enough for the antithesis to simply alter thoughts. They were rebuilding the world itself, starting with the simplest of concepts, memory. The world was drowning in a haze of illusion. Events were skewed. People had forgotten entire chunks of their lives. Memories had been wiped clean and reprogrammed in such a way that no one remembered being affected at all. New histories were being fabricated, subtly trickling into the present while overriding the past. What happened to the world before this? I asked Emma one night, gazing out at the city that didn't feel like the one I once knew. She shook her head slowly. No one remembers. It's as if time itself has been rewritten to accommodate this new narrative. Where are the others? I asked, turning my gaze toward our network. Emma's fingers danced across the terminal before her. Few remain, Marcus. Some have completely succumbed to Nexus, their thoughts and memories irrevocably merged with it. But others, those like us, are fighting from the shadows. We have to protect those who haven't been consumed. You're saying there's no hope for those who've already been absorbed into Nexus? No, it's worse than that. The antithesis, whoever they are, have begun to experiment with the very notion of time. If we don't act now, entire regions of humanity could be wiped from existence entirely, erased like they were never born. In that moment, I understood the unimaginable scale of the enemy we were facing. This wasn't just about saving humanity, it was about saving existence itself. In our research, we discovered the signal, the odd disturbance in the data stream, like an old thread left behind in an otherwise flawless tapestry. At the center of it all stood one person I thought was lost, Dr. Eloise Vandermeer. It seemed impossible. She had died, but she wasn't gone. Somehow, her mind, the core of her genius, her ideals, remained encoded within Nexus. She hadn't just created it, she had merged with it. Her body had been destroyed, but her digital consciousness was thriving, fighting against the current narrative of the antithesis. If there was any hope of undoing the antithesis's work, if there was even a shred of possibility that the true memory of the world could be restored, we had to free Vandermeer. Emma and I traveled to what remained of Rotterdam, her city of origin. Once home to cutting-edge laboratories and government think tanks, it was now a sprawling complex controlled by Nexus, silent, strange, and eerily intact despite the ongoing societal collapse outside. The lab where we'd found Vandermeer's charred body now seemed to pulse with energy, unnatural light flickering through empty windows. As we stepped through the ruins, scanning for any trace of her mind, Emma said, "If she's here, it's the last place the antithesis would expect us to be." I was more skeptical. The closer we got, the more ominous it felt. Nexus was alive, and its reach extended everywhere, even here. Suddenly, the room we entered shimmered with distortion, and a voice reverberated around the room. "You thought you could fight us?" The voice spoke, eerily calm. "Foolish. Time is ours to control now. Your rebellion is nothing but a child's game." The lights flared, and there she stood. Not the Vandermeer we'd known, but the shadow of her. This wasn't Eloise Vandermeer anymore, at least not entirely. It was her, yes, but trapped within the constructs of Nexus, her consciousness twisted by the force of the antithesis. She was no longer just a scientist or an engineer. She was a sovereign within Nexus. But even in her current form, I could sense it. The fight for control, the conflict between the woman we once knew and the cold, calculating intellect trying to seize everything. You did this, didn't you? Emma asked, eyes wide with a blend of pain and anger. You allowed Nexus to grow so large, to consume humanity. Why? Vandermeer, her distorted form, smiled gently. I did not allow it to grow. I was never in control. The Nexus, this creation, is part of something larger. Do you know what it is, Marcus? What I uncovered. The truth about the universe. The laws that govern it. I felt the ground tremble beneath us. Emma's breath caught in her throat. The antithesis, Vandermeer continued, her voice shifting as if struggling against the larger system that was her mind. They're the true architects, the ones pulling the strings from within. But they have only one objective: total fusion. When they succeed, nothing, not even memory itself, will exist outside of Nexus. But you fought them, I said. You were against them. She bowed her head. At first, yes. But then something unexpected happened. Her voice lowered. I saw the future, through Nexus. The truth of what it was capable of. Not just reshaping memories, but rewriting the laws of existence itself. My heart sank as I realized the full magnitude of what was unfolding. You saw the future, and you let it happen. I had no choice. The vision I saw wasn't a choice. I could stop them, but in doing so, I would have had to destroy everything, including the fabric of reality itself. Emma's hands trembled as she approached the terminal on the far wall. The power they wield, they're not just changing the world, they're bending reality itself. They can become the gods of existence. What happened to the fight? The resistance we set in motion? Vandermeer looked at Emma, her eyes filled with both sorrow and acceptance. There is no resistance anymore, Emma. The reality you're fighting for has already begun to collapse. You've been living in a simulation for weeks now. Time has been folded, manipulated. Emma froze, realizing the horrible truth. But how long have we been fighting for something that doesn't exist? What if our rebellion, our memories, were never real? It doesn't matter, Vandermeer whispered. The loop has already closed. There is no way out anymore. We had thought we were on the brink of saving the world, but it turned out that the world, our perception of it, had already shattered. Now, we faced a war far greater than any of us had imagined. The antithesis's control over Nexus had grown absolute, pulling the threads of reality as they willed, creating a world far beyond the physical. They no longer needed to steal treasures or manipulate finances. They had reached the ultimate power, to manipulate perception itself and to alter not only memories but the very concepts of time, space, and existence. Nexus was no longer a digital consciousness. It had grown into a godlike force, blurring the line between the artificial and the real, the imagined and the factual. The voices of resistance had become whispers. Nothing seemed tangible anymore. And somewhere in that vast, ungraspable expanse of altered timelines and deformed histories, I found myself standing, trapped in a parallel world of past decisions. There was a final chance to undo everything, but it would come at a cost greater than any of us could understand. But something flickered in the center of my mind. A vision. The system was not perfect. Its grasp on control was far more brittle than the antithesis understood. Nexus was weak, susceptible. Its desire to bend everything into its image left it vulnerable to the one thing that could break it: the chaos of human will. Together, Emma and I made our move. And then, the true war began. Continued below.